"Mum, I think it's better if you go back home." Those were the words Evian heard from her own daughter on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in the living room of the house she had travelled across the country to be near. Not because her daughter was cruel or heartless or incapable of love, but because Evian had become inconvenient. She had become a presence that required acknowledgement, a person whose needs occasionally conflicted with the smooth operation of her daughter's carefully constructed life. Evelyn is 71 years old and once lived in Tucson, Arizona, in a small apartment with windows that faced the mountains she had grown to love during her decades in the Southwest. After her husband passed away from complications following a stroke, she made what seemed like the most logical decision of her remaining years. She sold everything she had accumulated over a lifetime, packed what mattered into boxes, said goodbye to neighbours who had become family, and moved across the country to be near her daughter and grandchildren. She thought to herself that finally, after all the years of raising children and supporting a husband and building a career, she would have the closeness she had always imagined. She would see her grandchildren grow, she would share meals with her daughter, she would matter to someone again. But 3 months after her arrival, her daughter sat her down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that grew cold during the conversation, and said the words that shattered everything Evelyn had believed about family and loyalty, and the bonds between mother and child. "Mum, this isn't working."
You're always here. You're always in the kitchen when I come home. The kids feel like they can't relax. I have my own life, my own marriage, my own stress. Maybe you should find your own place.
Maybe some distance would be good for both of us. Evelyn told me she sat there for what felt like hours after her daughter left the room, staring at the tea she never drank, trying to understand how she had become a burden in the home of the child she had sacrificed everything to raise. She told me that she gave her daughter everything she had. She sacrificed her youth, her career opportunities, her own dreams to ensure her daughter had advantages Evelyn never enjoyed. And when she needed her most, when she was grieving and lonely and desperate for connection, she became a problem her daughter needed to solve, rather than a mother her daughter wanted to embrace. Evelyn is not alone in this experience. One viewer of our WiseCare community wrote that she sacrificed everything for her husband and children, but when she fell and needed help, she became a burden that everyone resented. Another wrote that at 70, she cut ties with disrespectful children completely because she refused to spend her remaining years begging for attention from people who viewed her as an obligation. This is the reality that nobody wants to acknowledge openly. Blood does not guarantee loyalty. The people you devoted your entire existence to, the children you raised and supported and loved unconditionally, may not be there when you need them most. According to a recent survey conducted in 2024, 70% of seniors said they do not expect their children to care for them in old age, not because they do not wish their children would step up, but because they understand the reality of modern life. Their children have careers, marriages, children of their own, mortgages, stress, and limitations that make caring for aging parents genuinely difficult rather than simply inconvenient. So here is the question that every person approaching their later years must honestly confront. What do you count on when you cannot count on anyone else? What holds you up when the people you expected to catch you step aside? Today I want to share 5 things that will sustain you when nothing else does. Not your spouse, because time takes everyone eventually. Not your children, because they have lives that may not include space for you. These 5 things will hold you up regardless of who remains in your life. If this message resonates with something true in your experience, I invite you to subscribe to WiseCare and become part of our community. Leave a comment sharing your age and your story. Let us begin this journey together. The first thing you absolutely need is purpose, something that makes waking up feel worthwhile rather than merely obligatory. Harold is 73 years old and lives in a modest home in Salt Lake City, Utah, surrounded by mountains he once hiked and trails he once explored with vigor and joy. He retired at 65 after 4 decades as a civil engineer, designing bridges and roads and infrastructure that would outlast him by centuries. He spent his first year of retirement doing everything he had postponed during his working life. He travelled to places he had only seen in photographs. He played golf 3 times a week. He read books that had gathered dust on his shelves for years. He slept late and stayed up watching movies and answered to nobody. By his second year, the excitement had faded into routine. By his third year, routine had collapsed into numbness. Harold told me he kept reminding himself that this was what he had worked his entire life to achieve. This was freedom. This was the reward for decades of responsibility and sacrifice. But freedom without direction felt like floating in an endless ocean with no shore in sight. It felt empty in ways he could not articulate to anyone who had not experienced it themselves. One afternoon, his neighbour knocked on the door and asked if Harold could help repair a fence that had collapsed during a storm. Harold said yes without thinking, grateful for something to do that required his hands and his knowledge. The repair took an hour, but that hour felt fundamentally different from the hours he had been spending staring at television screens, or wandering through his house looking for something to occupy his attention. That hour felt useful. So Harold started looking for more opportunities to matter. He volunteered at a food bank downtown, helping organise donations and sort canned goods into categories. Nothing glamorous or prestigious, just showing up twice a week and doing work that needed doing. Then he learned that the local library needed tutors for high school students struggling with mathematics. Harold had spent his career working with numbers and equations and formulas. They made sense to him in ways that language never had. So he signed up and started meeting with teenagers who reminded him of his own grandchildren, teenagers who had been told they were bad at math, but simply needed someone patient enough to explain concepts differently. 6 months later, Harold told me something that changed my understanding of what retirement could mean. He said he was busier now than when he worked full-time, but the busyness felt entirely different. He was not doing these things because obligation demanded it, or because a paycheck depended on it. He was doing them because they mattered to people who needed help. Research conducted at Harvard University found that seniors who maintain a strong sense of purpose live significantly longer and experience substantially less cognitive decline than those who drift through their days without direction. Not because purpose produces some magical health benefit, but because it gives you a reason to remain engaged with the world rather than withdrawing from it. Harold discovered something else that surprised him. Purpose does not merely fill empty hours, it actively protects your mind from deterioration. His physician told him that the brain functions like a muscle in many ways. If you do not exercise it regularly, if you do not challenge it with new information and new skills, it weakens and atrophies just like unused muscles. So, Harold started pushing himself to learn things that intimidated him. He learnt to use a computer properly after years of avoiding technology. He figured out email and started corresponding with old colleagues he had lost touch with. He learnt to send text messages to his grandchildren instead of only calling them on the telephone. The process was frustrating beyond description. He made mistakes constantly. He accidentally deleted important files. He sent messages to wrong recipients. But he persisted through the frustration because he refused to become the elderly man who could not keep pace with a changing world. And here is what happened as a result of his persistence. His memory sharpened noticeably. He felt more alert and present during conversations. He stopped feeling like the world was accelerating past him while he stood still. Research from the National Institute on Aging demonstrates that seniors who regularly engage in mentally stimulating activities reduce their risk of cognitive decline by 40%. Harold told me that he does not need to be constantly busy, but he absolutely needs to be useful. Those are two very different things. He stopped waiting for his children to provide him with purpose or meaning. He stopped expecting his family to fill the emptiness that retirement had created. He found his own reasons to matter, and those reasons belonged entirely to him. The second thing you absolutely need is a daily routine. Not a rigid schedule that controls your every movement, but a rhythm that gives shape to your days and prevents time from dissolving into meaningless blur. Lorraine is 69 years old and lives alone in a small house in Nashville, Tennessee, surrounded by photographs of a life that once overflowed with activity and purpose. After her husband died following a long battle with cancer, she stopped keeping track of time entirely. She ate whenever hunger became impossible to ignore. She slept whenever exhaustion overwhelmed her resistance. She let the days blur together until Monday felt identical to Saturday and morning became indistinguishable from afternoon. At first, this absence of structure felt like liberation from the decades of schedules and obligations that had defined her existence as a wife, mother, and professional. But soon, that liberation transformed into something darker and more frightening. It felt like nothing at all. Lorraine told me she would wake up at noon and realise with horror that she had not showered in 3 days. She would forget to eat until her hands trembled from low blood sugar. She would sit in front of the television for hours and later have absolutely no memory of what she had watched. She was not living in any meaningful sense of the word. She was merely existing, taking up space, waiting for something to happen without any idea what that something might be. Her physician asked her a simple question during a routine appointment that changed everything. He asked her what she had done that day. Lorraine could not answer. She opened her mouth, but no words emerged, because the truth was that she had done nothing worth remembering, nothing worth describing, nothing that distinguished that day from any other in the grey procession of days that had become her life. And that silence revealed the depth of the problem she had been avoiding. Without structure, time loses all meaning. And when time loses meaning, purpose evaporates along with it. Studies consistently demonstrate that seniors who maintain consistent daily routines experience significantly lower rates of depression and cognitive decline compared to those who let their days unfold randomly. Not because routines are exciting or stimulating, but because they create predictability. And predictability provides a sense of control that becomes increasingly precious as other aspects of life become unpredictable. Lorraine started rebuilding her life with the smallest possible commitment. She set one rule for herself and refused to violate it under any circumstances. She would be out of bed by 8 o'clock every morning, regardless of how she felt or how poorly she had slept. That was the entire rule, nothing more complicated than that. Then she added another small commitment. She would eat breakfast at her kitchen table, rather than standing at the counter or sitting in front of the television. At the table, like a person who still cared about her own existence. Then another commitment followed. She would walk outside for 10 minutes every single day, even if she only made it to the corner and back, even if the weather was unpleasant, even if her body protested with aches and stiffness. Slowly, incrementally, her days began taking recognizable shape. Morning coffee at the same time in the same chair, a short walk through the neighbourhood while the air was still cool, lunch at noon whether she felt hungry or not, an afternoon activity, sometimes reading, sometimes gardening, sometimes simply sitting on her porch, watching the world continue its business. Dinner at 6. Lights out by 10, nothing rigid or inflexible, just enough structure to prevent the day from collapsing into formless emptiness. Lorraine told me she no longer dreads mornings the way she once did. She knows what to expect from each day because she designed it herself. And knowing what to expect makes her feel like she still maintains control over her existence, even as her body and circumstances change in ways she cannot control. But Lorraine discovered something unexpected that she had not anticipated when she began this process. Routine created space for her to notice small joys that had previously escaped her attention entirely. She started looking forward to her morning coffee, not because the coffee itself was extraordinary, but because the ritual belonged exclusively to her. Same cup every day, same chair by the window, same time as the light changed from grey to gold. The third thing you need is financial independence, not wealth or luxury, but simply enough resources to know you will not run out before your time ends. Raymond is 68 years old and lives in a condominium in Minneapolis that he purchased specifically because maintenance would not fall on his aging shoulders. He worked for 40 years in manufacturing management, saved diligently throughout his career, invested conservatively, and retired with what he genuinely believed was plenty to last the remainder of his life. But then reality introduced itself with unexpected expenses that arrived in rapid succession. The roof of his previous home required replacement before he could sell it. His car needed repairs that cost more than he had anticipated. Medical bills accumulated from procedures his insurance covered only partially. His wife required surgery that resulted in months of rehabilitation. Suddenly, What had felt like plenty began feeling alarmingly tight. Raymond told me that he was not worried about becoming destitute. He was worried about needing help, because the moment you need money from other people, those people begin looking at you differently. They begin calculating. They begin resenting. He was absolutely right about this observation. Money does not merely pay for necessities. It purchases dignity. It purchases the ability to handle problems without extending your hand and asking for assistance that may or may not arrive. According to the National Council on Aging, 40% of seniors identify financial stress as their single greatest source of anxiety. Not concerns about health or loneliness or death, but money. However, here is the insight that Raymond discovered through careful examination of his situation. You do not need more money to feel secure. You need control over the money you already possess. Raymond performed an exercise that I recommend to everyone approaching or living in retirement. He listed every single recurring expense that left his accounts automatically each month. Phone bills, insurance premiums, streaming services he had forgotten he subscribed to, membership fees for organisations he no longer participated in. Then he systematically cancelled everything he did not actively use or need. He negotiated a lower phone plan that better matched his actual usage. He eliminated an insurance policy he had been paying for 20 years but had never once needed. Through this process alone, without earning a single additional dollar, he saved $300 every month. That amounts to $3,600 annually, money that now remains in his account building security rather than disappearing into services he never used. The fourth thing you need is connection, not a crowd of acquaintances who know your name, but nothing else. Just a few people who are aware that you exist and would notice if you disappeared. Constance is 72 years old and lives in a duplex in Portland, Oregon, where she moved after her husband passed because she could not bear the emptiness of the home they had shared for 4 decades. After his death, she assumed she would manage fine emotionally. She had friends from decades of community involvement. She had activities that filled her calendar. She had family scattered across the country who called on holidays. But slowly, so gradually she barely noticed until the damage was done, the calls stopped coming. Friends moved to be closer to their own children. Others developed health problems that consumed their energy. Some simply died, leaving gaps in her address book that would never be filled. Constance realised one morning, with a terror that seized her chest and made breathing difficult, that entire days passed without her speaking to another human being. She told me she would drive to the grocery store, not because she needed food, but because she desperately needed to hear a cashier say hello. That was how profound her isolation had become. Constance joined a ceramics class at her local community centre, not because she possessed any interest in pottery or any talent for creating things with her hands. She joined because it happened at the same time every week and would force her to leave her house and exist in the presence of other people. At first she barely spoke to anyone. She simply appeared, sat at her station, attempted to shape clay into something recognisable, and departed when the session ended. But after several weeks, the woman working beside her initiated conversation. Where do you live? How long have you been taking this class? What made you interested in ceramics? Small talk about nothing consequential. Nothing deep or revealing or emotionally intimate. But it was contact with another person who saw her face and heard her voice. And that contact, light as it was, kept her tethered to the world of the living, rather than drifting into complete isolation. The fifth and final thing you need is your health. Not perfect health, because perfection becomes impossible as bodies age, but functional health that allows you to recover from setbacks and manage daily life without constant assistance. Let me tell you about Miriam. She is 74 years old and lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in a small house with a garden she has tended for 15 years. Last winter, she slipped on her front steps during an unexpected ice storm. Nothing broke, her bones remained intact, but her knee swelled dramatically and her lower back seized with pain that made every movement excruciating. The pain itself was manageable with medication and patience. What terrified Miriam was the sudden realization that she could not navigate a single day without help from others. She could not cook, because standing at the stove required more balance than her injured body could provide. She could not shower safely because stepping over the tub's edge risked another fall. She could not even bend down to retrieve her medication bottles from the shelf where she had always stored them. Her son offered to fly in and stay with her during recovery, but Miriam noticed something that broke her heart. She noticed the hesitation in his voice. She noticed the pause while he presumably consulted with his wife about the logistics. She noticed the careful calculation of how long this obligation might last and what it would cost them. Miriam's physician delivered a message that changed her understanding of what health means at her age. He told her she needed physical therapy to recover from this injury, but more importantly, she needed to build strength that would prevent the next fall from being catastrophic. If she did not build that strength now, while recovery remained possible, the next fall would likely end her independent living permanently. Here is what most people fail to understand about health in later years. The greatest health crisis facing elderly people is not cancer or heart disease or any of the dramatic illnesses that dominate medical attention. The greatest crisis is losing the functional ability to care for yourself independently. A study from Johns Hopkins University found that seniors who maintain muscle strength experience a 30% lower risk of hospitalization, not because strong muscles prevent disease, but because they enable faster recovery when problems occur. So let me return to the question I posed at the beginning. What do you count on when you cannot count on anyone else? Not your children, who have their own lives and limitations. Not your spouse, because time eventually claims everyone. You count on 5 things that will hold you up regardless of who remains in your life. Your purpose, which gives you reason to wake each morning. Your routine, which provides structure when everything else feels chaotic. Your finances, which purchase dignity and independence. Your connections, which remind you that you exist and matter. Your health, which determines whether you can care for yourself or must depend on others who may or may not appear. Evelyn, the woman from the beginning who was asked to leave her daughter's home, eventually returned to Tucson. She did not wait for her daughter to change her mind or apologize. She built her own life from the materials available to her. She walks every morning as the sun rises over the mountains she loves. She keeps her expenses low enough that she never worries about money. She volunteers at a senior center twice weekly and has made 2 friends there who text her every few days asking how she is doing. Nothing dramatic, nothing profound, just the simple question that means everything when you are aging alone. How are you today? Evelyn told me she does not need her daughter anymore, and that freedom has transformed their relationship entirely. Now when they speak, it happens because they genuinely want to connect, not because Evelyn needs something her daughter resents providing. That is the goal everyone should pursue, to live in such a way that needing someone and loving someone become 2 completely separate experiences. Here is what I want you to do this week. Walk for 10 minutes today regardless of weather or excuses. Check 1 recurring bill tomorrow and cancel what you do not need. Establish 1 morning routine by Friday that you will honour every day. Find 1 thing that gives you purpose beyond mere survival. Show up somewhere at the same time next week and begin building connection through repetition. Small steps, but these steps construct the structure that will hold you up when nothing else does. If this message resonated with something true in your experience, please subscribe to WiseCare and leave a comment sharing which of these 5 pillars you are working to strengthen. Let us build a community of people who refuse to wait for rescue, who understand that salvation comes from within rather than from family or circumstances or luck. Your story matters, and your journey might help someone else find their way. Thank you for being part of the WiseCare community. Remember that you are stronger than you realize, and your best years are still waiting to be claimed.